All right, so we are live, and if you can hear me and you can see me, then please let me know in the chat because obviously there's always a little bit of a delay, and I want to make sure that everybody's on board before we get started tonight. Otherwise, welcome to Marauder Mondays, which is something we do every week, most of the time anyway, and it's a good time for us to get together, network, build community, and then discuss some of the things that are happening in the world right now because it is a very interesting place that we find ourselves in lately. So if you can see me, you can hear me. Thank you so much for letting me know in the chat. Looks like Tragum says you can hear me loud and clear perfectly. So awesome that all of you are here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to go ahead and just kind of get things rolling so that we can get discussions started and that we can kind of stay on top of what's happening around the world and everything else right now. So I do not have a guest tonight, and that's totally fine because we have each other, and that's what we're going to do. And try not to sound cheesy, but man, that really went through, didn't it? Okay. So just to kind of get things started, and based on the title here, right? Indicators of collapse, right? Let's just talk about what the basic definition of societal collapse is, okay? Anthropologists, historians, and sociologists have proposed a variety of explanations for the collapse of civilizations, including or involving causative factors such as environmental change, depletion of resources, unsustainable complexity, invasion, disease, decay of social cohesion, rising inequality, and secular decline of cognitive abilities, loss of creativity, and misfortune. So when you actually just look at the basic definition, of course, this is Wikipedia, and of course, anybody could have written that, I guess. But what I'm trying to say is that when you read those different indicators that are there and how different people throughout history have kind of identified when a society was on its way to a collapse, a lot of those different indicators are things we're experiencing right now. Regardless of how you feel about it, we have the depletion of resources, obviously. We have things like environmental change, for better or for worse, some of that definitely exists. We have the unsustainable complexity, which is definitely related to things like the supply chain and everything else, as well as just our political vitriol and everything we have going on right now. Invasion hasn't yet happened, at least currently here, but of course, there's a lot of different talk about what's happening over in Eastern Europe. And then we have disease, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, regardless of the entire narrative around that situation. That is definitely part of the equation at this point. And decay of social cohesion, feel like we're pretty much right on that spot right now. And then we have the rising inequality. I think we all know the middle class is getting decimated and that the gap between lower class and upper class is going to increasingly become more obvious. And then the secular decline of cognitive abilities and loss of creativity and misfortune. So those different indicators are things that I feel we can all kind of agree are part of what we all are experiencing right now. And it's something I wanted to kind of address to kind of get the conversation started, since it feels like there's so much happening and we wonder, where is this going to lead? What is this going to take us to? What happens next? And I think if you start applying a lot of what's going on right now to the idea of societal collapse of some kind, regardless of whether or not it's on a local level, on an urban level versus in a rural sense, maybe we see something happen within the metropolitan areas first, and then we start wondering how things are going to affect us down the line when it comes to a rural environment. And then you also have the other ideas of watching it happen maybe in a different country or in a different place while other countries try to adapt to that situation. So these are all things that we have to consider, and it's something that we prepare for regularly in the preparedness community. I don't know about you, but I think that we obviously think of societal collapse as being one of the biggest factors for what could lead us over the edge. And of course, the way people would act during a collapse is what we are concerned about the most. Because yes, of course, having things like the supply chain breakdown and having the lack of resources is huge, but it's really the behavior of other people that makes us consider things like self-defense such a high priority. And I think that all of us are kind of feeling that right now. So I do want to get into the chat really quick and say hello to some of you that have joined tonight. I really appreciate every one of you being here, so thank you so much for that. Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here and helping me mod. I appreciate it. Diabetic Prepper, good to see you. Alberto, good to see you as well. Let's see here. Brian Barbie, good to see you. Thanks for being here. New England Prepper Mimi, hi from New England. Well, hello from North Dakota. Good to see you here. And there's a lot of other familiar names. South Florida DCL, great to see you. And John Doe, I do not have a Magic School Bus, but if I could acquire one, you know that I would. So if you see Miss Frizzle anywhere, I guess just let her know. But man, I just shouldn't know that off the top of my head so well. So now I'm very concerned about my entire ability to remember things. Anyway, everyone go ahead and check in. And if you are looking for community, if you're looking for network and you want to build your community, check in the chat. Let people know where you're from. You might find some people in your area. You might find some people to network with to help support during a situation. But you also want to join the Discord. So make sure you guys check out the Discord. I opened it up to the public recently. We do have some private levels there for Patreon members and for channel members. But at the same time, there's also the public chat that has an entire listing of different states so that you can try to network within there. We also have some other countries listed now as well to try to get people to group up and meet up. So just throwing that out there, make sure you check it out. And I'm sure Northern Girl Hobbies can put the link in the chat at some point. If I try to get it right now, I'll be wasting a lot more time, I have a feeling. Because I guess I'm just not prepared. So let's go ahead and talk. Tennessee Tactical, good to see you. And Zombie Prepper, thank you so much for joining the channel membership. I really appreciate it. And honestly, all the support you guys send my way is incredibly appreciated. So thank you so much. And it really helps motivate me to kind of keep doing what we do here. And I don't want you guys to think that I'm trying to hide the fact that I actually don't have a white hair streak, because I definitely do. But it's been cold, and this is what I'm doing lately. I'm sorry. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about some things related to this whole indication of societal collapse, all right? I think one of the biggest ones, one of the most obvious things that's happening right this second, and something that a lot of us have already talked about, but needs to kind of be discussed, at least on this more, personal level, I guess you might say, is what's happening in Canada, because it's a good example of a lot of different scenarios coming together in one, okay? So the flooding in British Columbia that basically cut off the port of Vancouver is a huge deal, because not only is it decimating the supply chain for a lot of Canada, because I believe they do something like $250 million worth of goods through the port of Vancouver per day. And that just tells you that that's $250 million worth of goods that aren't being transported now. It's one of the largest ports in the entire continent of North America. So you can understand how this affects not just Canada, but everywhere else, because the cargo ships that are stuck in port in other places are also now dealing with the fact that they can't be unloaded at this port. So it kind of just goes around full circle and is going to cause more and more delays and more issues. But what we also have to remember is that not all of the problems we're facing are always man-made. Not every single one is, but many of them are. And this is a situation where a man-made issue, because I think we can all agree that what's happening to the supply chain, what's happening to shipping in general, and everything related to sending cargo around the planet, lots of that is a man-made disaster when it comes to their inability to keep logistics up and running. And a lot of what's caused that has been implemented by decisions that we've made as people, not you and I necessarily, but the people who make those decisions. And then you have this compounded with an actual natural disaster that then pushes that whole situation into the next level. And that's what I take from this whole situation. Of course, what's happening in Canada is very tragic, and we don't want to see these things happen to anyone. And obviously, there's going to be a huge response, and people are going to be hopefully taken care of. But what we really should be thinking about here is that at any point in time, a natural disaster can easily take out a huge section of the supply chain. And when we're already stressing it to the point that we are, based on our own demands in many ways, what does that natural disaster do in the sense of exponential damage? And that's kind of where we are right now. And that's why I wanted to bring this up, because yes, this is going to hurt everybody, not just Canada, because it slows down the entire process. There's ships in that port that aren't unloading and aren't able to unload, and now are going to have to delay their schedule for anywhere else they're supposed to be. And that's just how this whole thing is going to work. And then you move that into the realm of, where that affects next and who gets affected the most and what that does in the sense of a ripple throughout the supply chain. So wanted to bring this to your attention. If you didn't know about the flooding in British Columbia, it's something you should definitely be looking into and kind of keep an eye on, especially related to the Port of Vancouver, because that can affect us directly, can affect the rest of the world directly in many ways. And Yeah, so right here it even says since 2017, 300 to $350 million is traded between British Columbia and the rest of Canada per day by road or rail. Okay, and the rail system is what is broken basically from being able to attach the Port of Vancouver to other places in Canada. And that's saying that the Port of Vancouver, the busiest port in Canada, is moving $550 million worth of cargo each day. So every day that it's out of commission, that's $550 million worth of goods, resources, and supplies, manufacturing components, food, everything related to the supply chain that isn't being transported, that's not being delivered. And that's a lot of money. And if you think about when you apply that to the cost of goods versus the MSRP or the actual price at the store, that's a lot more than even what our money could buy, because we're talking about, wholesale amounts at this point. So a huge hit, and definitely, hoping the best for everyone in Canada. And if you're affected by this and you're in British Columbia, make sure you check in. Let us know if you're doing okay. Let us know how things look on the ground, and let us know if you've experienced any shortages or anything related to this event that you can see causing problems here in the near future. And if you're seeing it in your area, there's a good chance it might affect some of us that are, down south or maybe in other parts of the world as well, but maybe just not, immediately. So I do want to go ahead and jump in the chat real quick. Let's see here. Northwest Preppers here. Good to see you. Let's see. White Space Marines is here. If you don't know what Space Marines are, I guess if you know, you know. Okay, I'm just going to throw that out there. And then V Prep, good to see you. Oi Estudiant, good to see you as well. I keep trying on that one. I think I'm getting better at it. And then let's see. Gene McDaniel, good to see you. Okay, so there's a lot of great people here in the chat. And every Monday we do this. So if you're new here and you haven't actually been to a live stream on my channel on a Monday night, this is Marauder Mondays. And I try to do it every single week. And it's just a great way for us to kind of talk to each other. You guys can ask me questions. If you guys want to ask me anything directly, make sure you tag my name on it so it highlights it, and then I can see it a little bit easier and hopefully get back to you. Donna Divine Prepping, good to see you. And at the same time, this is just a good way for us to bounce around ideas at times, okay? But I do want you guys to understand, when it comes to the supply chain breaking, to unrest, and the indicators of collapse, which is what this live stream is titled tonight, all of those things are falling into place to the point where it's hard to ignore them any longer. And if you're ignoring them, it's not going to do you any good other than create more surprises for you down the road. So I do want to say, Dale Cobb, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate it. And Tom F., thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. And I've always said this from the beginning, make sure you're prepared before you start sending money to someone else. But as long as you're good to go with what you're at or where you are or what you have, thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. Rip Curl Readiness, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other things going on around the world right now, okay? And I just want to kind of touch on a couple points because I think there's some interesting things to talk about here related to just basic statistics when regarding unrest, okay? So, and this is where, I try to figure out how to not be a boomer in front of everybody in the world or whatever. Or, around 600 people, which feels like everybody in the world in many ways, okay? Let's see here. I've got this. I swear I really do. And here we go. Okay. So, basically, from the 2020 Global Peace Index, right? Which is just another statistics-driven data gathering report that gets put out. Basically, civil unrest has doubled over the last decade. So doubled is a pretty big deal. And when you think of things in the terms of, decades, this past decade, I guess in the grand scheme of things, hasn't had any of like the major events that we saw. For example, like a 2001 situation, right? But we have had things like, I guess you could, probably throw in the recent events, of 2020. But what we're really talking about is 2011 to 2018. And what you can see is that protests and riots roughly doubled from those years, okay? And when you talk about that, you have to really think about how much that really means. Double is huge. An increase is one thing. We talk about that very often when it comes to crime, when it comes to just the rate of assaults and stuff like that that happen in major metropolitan areas, they usually do it by percentages because in a lot of ways they don't tend to double. Doubling is a big number, okay? And you can see here on this graph, it kind of gives you an idea. Okay, so 64% of protests were nonviolent. This was 2011 to 2018, so I'd be interested to see how much this has changed in just the last 2 years. 6% were general strikes, 30% were classified as riots. And that's huge. If 1/3 of all protests become riots, that's a big thing for us to use as an indicator for where we are as a civilization, as a society, and everything else, but also to try to keep your threat index on point. If you know about a protest happening in your area and you know it's going to be organized and somewhat large, then you can kind of look at this data and have an idea that there's like a 30% chance it might become a riot. And that's just kind of what this data is showing us here. 4,700 nonviolent demonstrations and 2,200 riots, okay? And you can see that, of course, with the total number of demonstrations, nonviolent ones, generally, general strikes and riots are going up with them in kind of the same fashion. Now, of course, there's some deviation from that. But what this just tells you is that we're seeing more and more unrest. It's growing. Over the last 10 years, it's doubled. It's not going to just stop growing because people feel better about things suddenly. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And obviously, a lot of these different stories and these different news articles that come out are going to have some bias and everything else related to it. But I thought it had a good point in the sense of telling us the numbers and looking at the fact that if unrest has just doubled over the last 10 years, when will it be doubled from the last 10 years? Is it already? I mean, that's a possibility. Within the last 2 years, we've seen such an uptick in unrest, such an uptick in rioting and looting and everything else related to it, that it would be interesting to see just the last 2 years in comparison to those 10 and see how much further we've actually gone in the sense of unrest. And this is global, by the way. This isn't just in the United States. We're talking about everywhere. Like, this is what they're saying. So around the world, double the unrest in the last 10 years, 30% of it turns into riots, okay? Now, this is where things, get interesting because, we know what's happening and we know what we've seen here in our own country. And something, I recently brought to everyone's attention. Sorry, I just wanted to do something weird to kind of wake you guys up. But something I recently brought to everybody's attention in a video, but is still something, worth talking about, is this whole situation with what's happening in the Netherlands, okay? So we know what these protests are about. We know what these events are about. We know why people are upset. But what you guys really should be taking from this, at least in my opinion, is the fact that this has become an actual live fire scenario where police are actually firing their firearms, okay? And now, for whatever reasons is behind that is not, part of what I have to share with you information-wise, because that is not something I'm aware of completely, and I'm not going to just comment on things I don't know about. But what I will say is once these things turn into a live fire situation, and once the police are actually opening fire, whether or not they're warning shots or whatever you want to call it, once we move into that territory, it creates escalation regardless. We know that when excessive force is used, regardless of your feelings on excessive force, okay, that's a different conversation. I'm not sure exactly, if they were in a position where that was necessary or not. What I'm trying to say is that when the concept of excessive force is used, when there's live fire coming from the authority against protesters who are upset with the authority, all that tends to do is escalate the situation and create more tension and create more situations that arise that possibly require more live fire scenarios. And then that just kind of grows on itself. And we know how the snowball effect works here. We know how exponential growth works. We know that these things don't just cool off overnight generally. So keep an eye on what's happening in the Netherlands, because in all honesty, what they're protesting about is what a lot of the world's protesting about. What we're seeing in Austria and in Australia and just all around the world. And here in the United States too, to a lesser degree, but also here, this is something that's going to keep continuing and keep growing. And when these countries are putting stricter and stricter restrictions into place, this is the reaction you can expect. And this doesn't really matter whether or not you agree with restrictions or not, or any of that stuff. What matters here is that this is what putting people into a corner does. And this is what it's going to create. This is what it's going to cause, regardless of your feelings on the situation. this is what's going to happen. So just keep an eye on it and expect to see similar things eventually where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States. It doesn't matter if you're in New Zealand. It doesn't matter if you're in the UK. This is the stuff that happens. And when we see it happening around the world, it's pretty easy to assume that we're going to see it happen again at some point in time in our area. Okay. So just want to bring this to your attention. Like I said, global unrest, it's up double for the last 10 years. And this is happening right now in the Netherlands. And we're also seeing what's happening in these other countries. And it's easy to see why that number has doubled and why it's probably growing even further very quickly at this point in time. And that's another thing that we can talk about. And I guess I'll just relate it to something recent that happened. But if you want to talk about the entire situation involving that whole looting scenario, okay, so there was that looting situation that occurred in near San Francisco, I guess, and of course, 80 people stormed to Nordstrom's. They were wearing ski masks, they had crowbars, they were ready to rock, and it's unrest regardless of the intended purpose behind it, because it's a large organized group of people who are creating chaos of some kind. And regardless of whether or not there's a message, regardless of whether or not there's some kind of a political agenda, those people created a situation of unrest. When there's that many people committing a crime in an organized way in a centralized area, anyone in that area at that time is experiencing a without rule of law scenario. And in that scenario, those people are in the middle of unrest. So for them, they have a situation involving having to escape, having to evade, having to possibly defend themselves based on how the situation evolves. And that is something that you can apply to the same situation. Yes, it'll be considered some kind of organized robbery or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, it qualifies for unrest because of what it does to society in its area, in the locale that was affected by it. People are basically put out, and that's what unrest often does. It puts people out of their daily routine. It puts people out of their ability to get home or their ability to go to work or whatever it is. And I guarantee you that situation did a lot of that day. Okay. So I will get back in the chat here really quick just to kind of say hello and make sure we're actually having a conversation once in a while. Okay. Exile Reviews, good to see you. Glad you're here. Law of the Minimum, Night Magic. What's up with the black rock behind the global curtain? I would say, and when I said that, I almost thought you were talking about like this tapestry behind me. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have a black rock back there. But what I will say is that they are a mega corporation and they own so much real estate and so much of civilization in general. It's hard not to look at them in the same way you might look at, I don't know, Wayland Corporation from the Alien franchise or something like that, right? An overreaching corporation that covers everything within its grasp and has an influence on everything. And you better guarantee that they have tons and tons of lobbyists at work every single day trying to make governments around the world conform to what it is that's best for their business interests. So yes, they have the power, they have the finances, and they have the ability to capitalize on things like inflation, a housing crash, any of the things that are happening to our market, they're going to be able to capitalize on. So don't expect them to go away. They're not going to suddenly go bankrupt. They're going to keep winning until they probably own a country at some point, which is questionable whether or not they already do. All right. Cherokee Survivalist Skills. Hello and happy Thanksgiving. Daniel, hello. Good to see you. And I appreciate the kind words. And let's see. Grisio Nemo says, are any of the megacorps in Shadowrun? Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting when you've reached a point in society, when you've reached a point in, modern day history where you can have correlations to science fiction and actually just say that maybe this is real, and that's obviously what we're seeing. One thing I'll say, and I want to go ahead and touch base on this because it was very, motivating, or even just kind of a good reminder of how prophetic certain storytelling can be. But a movie I just watched 2 days ago, and it's a movie I've seen a ton of times, but it's just definitely worth rewatching, especially now, is V for Vendetta. And if you haven't seen that movie, please watch it, because it is a DC movie, which you would be surprised by because it's actually good. But that is an extremely accurate portrayal of where things could be heading if you want to watch a movie that gives you some ideas about what things could look like here in the future, because there's so many correlations in that film to where we are right now and to what's happening in the world that I kind of like freaked out a little bit, only because I was like, man, I've seen this movie probably 10 times at this point, and this 11th time with all of the different factors that we're dealing with here in the real world and everything else you can relate it to, I'm like, man, like this is kind of rough, to watch this right now because I'm kind of stressing about it. So I do want to, remind everyone here, if you haven't seen V for Vendetta, please watch it. Please relate it to what's happening right now. And I guarantee you'll be very surprised with a lot of the story involved, because it's very eye-opening and very telling as to, what could easily occur in the future. So Mike Carmen says CVS is closing 900 stores. I have heard similar reports as well. And I can't blame companies for doing that. In fact, I expect more of that to happen. I think everyone else should too. And here's the thing. And here's what I want you guys to really keep in mind when we're talking about moving into this next phase, which they're pushing very hard. Obviously, it's been called many things. A great reset comes to mind. And just how things are being handled now after 2020 have changed and are going to keep changing. So, yes. Is it related to things like staffing issues? I'm sure. Is it related to things like the fact that all their stores in the Bay Area of California are consistently robbed on a daily basis and they have no way of stopping it? Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of that too. Are we running low on pharmaceuticals, and is there huge supply chain issues when it comes to keeping medicine in stock? Yeah, I think so. So what I'll say about it is that at the end of the day, it's overhead that's killing these companies. They already ran on razor-thin margins. They already didn't make much money to begin with. It was just a very calculated numbers game, and they're losing, and they can't afford it anymore, and they're going to just shut down. And you can expect this with many different chains and many different companies that their name to go away. And think of it in the way of Radio Shack, okay? I wish Radio Shack still existed, okay? But they just really don't. But what I will say is that Radio Shack did not evolve with the times quickly enough to be able to maintain a business model. And that's what companies like CVS are also going to fall victim to. And the reason behind that is because their overhead is so expensive to do something that they can literally just maintain online. And that's what a lot of these companies are going to do. Why spend all this money on brick and mortar infrastructure? Why spend all this money on logistics of trucks delivering to store after store after store? Why spend all this money on staff to stock shelves and to clean and have bathrooms that are accessible to the public and all these other things, when you can literally just shut them all down, let everybody go, and do everything online? And when it comes to a pharmacy, I mean, that's what people would prefer anyway at this point in time. Send me my medicine to my front door. I don't want to go to CVS to buy groceries. I don't want to buy diapers there because they're really expensive. And this is just, how it's going to go. And I think, and that's not me trying to naysay any certain company. That's not me trying to say, oh, good thing CVS is closing. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. What I'm trying to convey is that that's just another example of how things are phasing out. And brick and mortar is definitely going away in many, many ways. And it's because these companies, especially the shareholders and the people who sit at the top who do not have to deal with day-to-day store activities, are seeing the fact that they don't need to deal with store activities. And they don't need to pay these people. And these people are demanding higher pay. So why don't we just not have them? And that's where a lot of companies are going to go. Don't be surprised to see the same thing when it comes to retail stores of all kinds. Clothing stores. Do you think that it's feasible for a store like JCPenney to have these giant, what are they, 30,000 square foot stores sometimes with, 3 stories, and then somehow pay all these employees to maintain it and pay for all this, equipment and everything else they have to utilize in the rent on a building like that, and then to just barely make the sales quotas and barely make their profit margins? No, they're going to close them down. They're going to go to online only, and people are going to actually probably flock to that. And it's just what's going to end up happening. We've seen it happen to places like Sears. We're seeing it happen to places all over the place. But those other companies did it to themselves early on because they didn't adapt. These companies aren't doing it to themselves at this point any longer. It's now becoming a necessity based on the way things are working. So, and I'm just talking, I guess, at this point, because that is what I see it as. I feel I have a decent grasp on business. It's one of my professional acumens, I guess you would say, is business analytics and running a business. I have some experience with it. I'm just going to throw it out there. So I will use some of that to try to convey my thoughts on what's happening out there. And I'm sure many of you can agree with me. You will be surprised how many businesses run on a profit margin of 1 to 10%. Okay. And then how many small businesses run on even smaller margins from time to time. And it is an interesting thing when you still have people who have never ran a business before in their life and have never had any skin in the game in the sense of dealing with profit shares or anything like that, tell you that, well, you own a business, so you must be rich, because that is definitely a lie. All right. So things are getting wonky here. I keep hitting my desk and things are falling apart. So let's talk. Magic Prepper. Gaucho said this. Have you seen the movie available on YouTube for $2.99 called New Order? It's in Spanish and English, and it takes place in Mexico. Gaucho, I have in fact seen that movie, and wow, don't watch that movie if you're squeamish. Don't watch that movie if you don't like being upset, because it's an upsetting movie. It's a very accurate portrayal of societal collapse and unrest. It's an accurate portrayal of how things would be handled in a country like Mexico that's riddled with corruption, because when it comes to look, we have our share of corruption here in the United States, but we know that Mexico's corruption goes pretty deep, especially when it comes to the police and the military. And when those people are the ones you have to rely on to save your life during a collapse, things are a lot riskier in an environment like that than they would be here in the United States. I'm just going to say that because of the data and the fact that, we like here, I know people in the National Guard, and I know like that they have a moral compass of some sort, but I do know that there's a lot of people in Mexico and the military and the police that are not even wanting to be bribed or anything along those lines, but are almost forced to be. So there's a lot of different factors at play where those things have to happen. And that movie does an excellent job of portraying how things would look if it all fell apart in a giant place like Mexico and with a structure like Mexico has. And it is horrible to watch in many ways because it's very frightening in the sense of how people are treated, what happens to people, and the violence and stuff within that film is hard to swallow. So don't watch it if you're not into seeing that kind of stuff. And honestly, I'm almost like, man, I almost wish I didn't. But I did watch it, and it was very eye-opening. And I will say that similar things could easily happen here in the United States, but I do think that there was some reasons why that movie was portrayed the way it was based on the fact that it was in Mexico. And also another reason why, if anything ever goes south in that way and, Mexico's where it's at, that's why I learned Spanish. So bilingualism, not a bad idea. Probably one of my better preps, to be honest, but it's not something that's easily taught or easily learned. So, I think being able to talk two languages is huge, but the more I think about it, the more I thought maybe, I should have learned Mandarin, but that's a different conversation, Tommy Bites Homestead. Hello. Good to see you. Good to see you. Aaron Q. What's up? Match Prepper. Hope all is well. I believe it is. So thank you for being here. And let's see here. Lisa G, saw New World Order, not for the squeamish. Exactly, Lisa G. And I don't want to put it out there like I'm suggesting anyone to watch it. All I'm saying is that I did watch it, and that was my take on it. So, and Gaucho, you brought it up, so you can take responsibility. All right. Okay. I just want to go ahead and talk about a couple things here. Now, we are limited to what we can do on this platform. I think we all know that, okay? But I do want to talk about the fact that there's so many things happening. There's so many things happening that when you talk about the recent trial and you talk about what just happened at that Christmas parade, right? The tragedy that was involved there. And you talk about all these different events going on and how invested people become on these events and how vitriolic the conversations surrounding these events become. This is classic distraction. And I think everyone really needs to be paying attention right now to what's happening, because with how much attention is being paid to these events and the amount of I guess you would just say, surprise when it comes to seeing these things unfold here in the United States and seeing, people's reactions and seeing attacks like that happen on a Christmas parade, you have to try to divest yourself slightly from it and understand that if you get too involved and you get too invested, that it's easy to lose track of everything else that's happening. And there's so much going on right now that these things are playing a perfect role in keeping you from paying attention. And so anytime these types of events start to occur, I just try to take a step back and remind myself that these are terrible things. These are tragedies that we should be aware of, that we need to keep an eye on. And when you talk about things like what happened at the Christmas parade, you know that you have to apply that scenario to your situational awareness and to do what you can to protect you and your family. That doesn't mean not to participate in things like parades, because that's what, communities do. And it's great to be part of community. And it's huge and what we need more of here in the preparedness community. But what I can say is that it's another example of why situational awareness and why being a hard target is so important, because you never know when these things are going to happen, and you never know what type of event could occur regardless of where you are. But do not lose track of what's happening around the world. Do not lose track of what's happening in our government. When these things happen, it's easy for the news outlets to focus solely on these events. And you'll have the big liberal media pundits talking about the trial for the next 6 months, probably. Great. But then you'll also have the other conservative media talking about this Christmas parade attack for a long time as well. And we're going to probably miss the point and miss the mark on some other stories that are happening in the meantime due to this invested attention. So I just want to kind of mention that in the sense of, yes, I mean, unrest is here and we're watching more of it unfold. And when these events occur, like such a violent event, it's hard to not get upset, not be enraged, and not want to understand why things like this are happening. But do not forget that this is when other things happen that nobody will talk about or know about because of these events existing. So I just want to go ahead and put that out there. And look, I'm probably as invested as many of you are in some of these events, just because of what I think they relate to in the sense of where we are as a society and like what the importance of them may be based on a lot of other factors. But at the end of the day, don't get too sidetracked. There's so much going on right now that it's hard to keep track, and it's easy to get lost in the other stuff, right? So, I mean, and there's other stuff going on. We all know that. And we all know that there's a lot of interesting things happening around the world. One thing I will say is that there is a lot of vitriol coming from the side of what I would call individual freedom, right? I think people are extremely upset about what's happening to their individual freedom. It doesn't matter what country you're in. I know, like in the Discord, we have people from other countries who are talking about what's happening to them in their home and why they are not able to be a person anymore when it comes to seeing their families, when it comes to having a daily life, a routine, just having a job, being able to visit people on the holidays. Those things are going away for them because of what their country is doing to them. And I think that when we see all of that happening and how many people are affected by it, the reaction to it from around the world is expected in many ways. And then the part that we have to consider that makes me a little bit concerned, I guess you would say, is with that being known, a lot of these things are known. We know these things. And the people who make all these decisions, they know all these things already. They have, gamed out all of these different scenarios many, many times through different think tanks that are well funded, by the way, to figure out how this is going to end or what's going to happen next or how people will react to A, B, and C. So they know how people are going to react to these things. They know what this is going to do. So planning ahead, playing that proverbial game of chess, which we know a lot of these people like to do, what's their next move based on this reaction that they know is guaranteed? And that's where the big concern should come into play, because we know countries like Austria are now pushing that envelope to say, well, everybody now, everybody, we don't care. That's what we're doing. And the rest of the world's watching, and they're going to say, okay, now what's everybody going to do? And they know what they're going to do. I'm sure they do. They have contingencies all over the place about how the reaction's going to go and who's going to do what and what factions are going to act in certain ways and who's going to make the most ruckus and everything else, right? But what's their plan for those things? And I think we can all speculate on that, of course, but we don't know exactly what it is. And that is why we should be concerned, because that plan is the one that is already well thought out. It's already strategized, and it has validity because they know exactly what people are going to do. And that is where I get kind of concerned about where we're heading. Okay. Just something I wanted to bring up, and it is an issue. Okay. So I do see people, Exile Review says we need to do our best to watch our surroundings when out in public from all the different things, all the different attacks that are happening. We need to be aware. And that's definitely true. Kevin says most people are perpetually distracted regardless of what is in the news cycle. And I can admit that as well. I would say a large majority of the population doesn't even pay attention to the news to begin with. So we're talking about the news creating content that's supposed to sway your opinion in a certain way. We all know the word for that. And they know they're only going to hit maybe 10 to 30% of the population based on their particular demographic. I think the rest of the people out there are generally watching TikTok and, probably going about their everyday daily life and getting home and jumping on, I don't know, League of Legends or something like that. I know that makes me sound old, but I swear it's still a thing. So let's see. And Heaven's Authority, good to see you. Hello. All right, the Diabetic Prepper says, you're right. As soon as one thing ends, another happens. They want to keep people from waking up and banding together. And of course, I think that's always been the best agenda, right? If you want control, you have to separate the people because it's easier to maintain control that way. And when you pit us against each other, it's like you're basically creating a deputized police force, right? Which is what they have tried to do in many ways already with like the neighborhood reporting on each other and red flag laws and stuff like that. It's very easy to get people to report on each other. So why even have these massive nationwide police forces? If you have a police state when the police are just next door neighbors, I mean, what's the big deal, right? So, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I did hear that, people were talking about protests happening in their area and some of the nicer neighborhoods where generally they haven't seen these type of protests, and stuff was happening where, if your vehicle had an American flag on it, it got vandalized. And it's like, man, like an American flag has become, a target at this point. And it's interesting because, there still are people, you might not believe me, but I will tell you there are people on the left and that are liberal that, a lot of these protesters claim to be a part of, that support the American flag and are still patriotic, at least, in their certain form. And that's totally fine. But what I'm trying to say is that, it doesn't matter anymore who you are or how you think or what your ideology is. You got that flag on your vehicle, you're a target now. And that's not a good place for us to be. I think we can all admit that. Okay. Let's see here. America First says, with utilities and crime skyrocketing, you're probably correct about brick and mortar stores closing. And that's kind of my thoughts, not just based on the business model. It's not just based on the transition to online everything and all that stuff. It's also based on the fact that people can't afford even the insurance, the damage. They can't afford to replace the stock or the product or any of those things any longer. So we're definitely experiencing a transition there, a shift because of the fact that it's just not worth it anymore. It's just not. And I mean, it's that. And I mean, managing thousands of employees is extremely difficult. OSHA is now stepping in, right? Doing all these things that makes that even more difficult. Then you have lawsuits, you have, everything from disciplinary actions to harassment to everything else that has to be involved there with having that many employees. So it's just easier to not have them, right? And then you get them out of the public sphere where they're affected by the public. And we've seen what's happened to, CVS employees recently in the last year and a half when they were trying to enforce certain mandates at their stores and they were, attacked. Like these things happen. So it's just not worth it. And that's unfortunate to say, but it's true. Okay. And I'm trying to get back in the chat. So usually when I say it's because I'm reading the chat and it's my way of filling some of the dead airspace. But, I'm sure you guys don't want to hear my hair metal or whatever else it is I'm deciding to listen to today. And that's something we could probably do. Like by the way, today I listened to Eskimo Callboy. We got the moves. That's the song I had on today. So if you guys don't know about that one, it's adult. It's adult, okay? But it is freaking hilarious. Anyway. Let's see here. Two-wheeled prepper thinks OSHA is about to be sued into irrelevance. I mean, that might be true. But at the same time, what's money anymore, especially when it comes to government agencies? I mean, they just keep passing more budgets for money that doesn't exist. They keep funding themselves, paying themselves. I don't think it matters. Sue them as much as you want. I mean, you might get payout. People will get payout, but the money that's getting paid out doesn't exist. It's not real money anymore, so they don't care. Sue them all you want. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing happening around that trial as well. I think a lot of people know they're setting themselves up for lawsuits, and they know that they've done defamation and slander and everything else related to that. But at the end of the day, who cares? Because the money's not real, so it doesn't matter, right? That's really not good, but that's kind of where we're at. Steve Violence, or Viserolence is what I'm going to say, actually. Watch the show Jericho. It's a great show. In the National Guard and the military runs short, they'll use PMC above the law. In Texas here, not much is going on. Everyone is armed, so no one takes a chance, okay? So I'll say two things about that, Steve, and thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. So Jericho is a good show. I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I'm actually trying to get my hands on a copy of the season 3 and season 4 graphic novels because I think that would be cool. Just because the show was cool and it didn't really end the way you want a show to end because they just got canceled basically from making those seasons. But they made them in graphic novels, and I do think Jericho is worth a watch. And I also think that if you're into preparedness and you're worried about world scenarios occurring that could send us back to an SHTF event, it does a good job of portraying that. So definitely a good show. I had a good time with it. And if you have the graphic novels for season 3 and season 4, let me know. All right. I got a P.O. box. I don't really advertise it, but P.O. Box 1570, okay, in Tioga, North Dakota, 58852. You guys can send me mail there if you'd like. I have a P.O. box. It's great. That doesn't mean I live there. Trust me. I'm a little bit, what's the word? Weary of giving out my home address, but I at least have a P.O. box that people can utilize. And somebody did send me mail there already, so I know people are figuring it out. But good show. Now, the other thing I want to say about that, Steve, and this is just me saying it to at least make everyone kind of aware. I love Texas. I have family in Texas. I have been to Houston many times. Love it there. Been to the Houston Rodeo. Got to see Kid Rock drive in the back of an F-150 with American flags and flamethrowers going off, and it was awesome. Okay, so very cool. But what I will say is that when you look at cities like Austin and some of the things that are happening there, there are issues with Texas. Yes, I think Texas does a good job of having its own unique approach to being a state here in the country. But I will also say that there's a lot of things happening in Texas that a lot of Texans don't want to have happen. And that is going to be something we have to keep an eye on, because obviously Texas has been a bastion of certain types of ideology as well as certain types of statehood for many, many, many years. So how do you get rid of that? Well, from the inside. And I think they're doing that, and they're trying their best. And it's starting to look like, at least in places like Austin, that some of that is actually working, okay? All right. I think I saw a couple other things come through. I want to see. Half Baked said, today I'm listening to Magic Prepper. That works for me as well, okay? Smiling Wolf says metal. Yeah, I do like my metal. I'm not going to lie, but I listen to everything. So don't try to, pigeonhole me into one genre. But I definitely do like my metal because I like energy. I like high energy music that kind of gets me moving. It's what I need to be able to work out. It's what I need to be able to motivate and get prepping done. It's what I need to be able to get hard work done. It really helps me out. So it's just something that's built into me. I am a musician, so having that rhythm and that beat really makes a big difference for my productivity. It's just part of what I need, okay? Let's see here. I'm trying to think about this. A lot of people listening to Megadeth. There you go. All right. And I'm just trying to kind of, touch base on the chat real quick. And Eli Moses, thank you so much for the super sticker, whatever, I guess, I'm just talking at this point. And Warrior for Christ says fitness is a key part of preparedness. I agree. And I think that is a big deal. And I think it's something that we have to focus on, but it's also very boring. I'm not going to lie to anybody about that. I'm not going to try to make it look more exciting than it is. I hate working out. I hate staying in shape. I hate eating well. Those are all things I'm forcing myself to do because it is very important, but it sucks and it's boring. Okay. Moving on from there. All right. Tamara Pierce says, if we have another bad storm here in Texas like we had this past February, we will be screwed. Grid will go down. And, and that's just something to consider, but we also had a great learning lesson from that storm. So if people haven't learned from that, that should tell us just how unwilling people are to do even the basic minimum amount of preparedness. There's been a lot of great people who've come from that storm and have commented on videos I've done, commented on other prepper channels and said, hey, I didn't prepare before. We had the winter storm. It really woke me up to the idea. Thank you for the ideas and the equipment and all the stuff you guys talk about. And I think that's awesome. And I think that is exactly what we want to see during any kind of an emergency situation. Post-emergency, people really should be self-reflecting on what went wrong, what they could have done better, and what they can do now in the future. But I don't think we're going to see that from the majority. Still, regardless of how bad things get, people are still never going to take responsibility. If they don't take responsibility in general in their daily life, why are they going to take responsibility for just, taking care of themselves in the sense of an emergency? So, D14 Jab says, I spend every minute I'm awake gathering information, and it seems all the different genres I listen to are all converging on similar topics when they used to be way apart. Singularity. And that's two things that can be. And that is one, right? One is similar to the idea of like Operation Mockingbird, right? The concept that everybody's getting in on the same story at this point in time because this is where the narrative needs to move, and this is where things are going to go, and this is what we have to preach, right? What's what we have to put out there? Well, we have to get everybody on the same page. So now's the time. The button has been pressed, and let's get it into motion. The other thing it can be is when so many things start to occur that they can no longer be ignored. Everyone has to admit that they exist. So those two things are very different because they're basically the difference of truth and fact and absorbable content for those who would like to consume it. I'm trying to avoid that one word because people just don't like it apparently. But what I'm trying to say is that it's one or the other. And that is what you should really be trying to think of when it comes to that information at this point. Everybody's on the same page? Well, is that good or bad? Because it's really only one or the other. Okay. But thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Cooking Sherry says, you have season 3 of the graphic novel. Yeah. See, I knew somebody did. I need to get one. I really do. I'm going to check it out. B. Hughes says, supporting either party implies not awake. You know what? There's a lot of truth behind that. And unfortunately, it feels like the only way to make a difference is by supporting some party because they have the most sway and the most power. But at a certain point, if both are abandoned completely, then what do they really have? Unfortunately, I don't see that happening pretty much ever. I think so many people are stuck in their concept that they're not willing to deviate from that at any point in time. And it goes for both sides, and that's understandable, and I get it. But at the same time, it is what it is. I mean, I agree. I think there's a lot of people on both sides that don't care at all about their constituents or what it is they're supposed to be representing. And that is what it is. We've seen examples of it from the last administration to this administration, from the last Congress, the last Senate, this Congress, this Senate. I mean, let's be honest. I'll put it in terms like this, okay? The people who are in charge right now, okay, they have the Senate, they have the Congress, and they have, or the House, and they have the White House. And they still haven't done any of the things that their constituents wanted done, right? That's just how this works now. It doesn't matter which side of it you're on. That's what they're doing, okay? So, just talking, I guess, and here's the thing. A lot of prepping channels get very political, and I get it. It's hard not to at times. And a lot of prepping channels share their ideologies, and that's totally fine. And, of course, at times I'm going to have some of my mind show through just because of the things that I participate in. I mean, it's hard to be pro Second Amendment and not have some kind of political connotation. But what I will say is that I try to be as welcoming to people who want to be part of preparedness as possible. And regardless of any predetermined ideologies involved with that desire to become more prepared, maybe through preparedness, people will find that self-reliancy is actually more effective and more efficient in their daily life. And they'll actually realize they don't need to be part of that, or they don't need to rely on it to support them, or whatever it is. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do here. I mean, I don't want to alienate anybody, but I do want to at least still maintain the things that I care about. And I think all of you feel the same way in many ways, I assume. So, and like I said, it's hard not to be connotated with certain politics at times because I'm pro 2A and I do have my thoughts. So I think that's the best way to say it. But that being said, the the political vitriol in this country is why the unrest exists. And we know that, groups like that whole shut down DC and stuff like that I talked about recently, they are training people and teaching people to do more of that. Okay. And what my issue is with groups like that isn't their politics specifically. That's not how this works. And in case you guys don't know about these different groups and you don't know of their existence, I'll just go ahead and share it with you really quickly, because it's just something for you to kind of keep in mind that these things do exist. Okay. Okay, what happens here is that this is specifically geared towards getting people out there and creating environments that then easily evolve into what we consider to be unrest. And of course, protesting is part of America. It's part of how our political system works. It's part of how we get our voice out when we're upset about things. But when you start protesting in an organized fashion to the degree that some of these groups are organized, right? And when I talk about that, this is the training they just did this past weekend, right? When you talk about things like teaching de-escalation and assertive intervention to action planning and talking to the press, that is not the natural formation of a protest any longer. Now you're talking about people that have a certain set of skills that they walk into a situation with in order to avoid certain aspects of what could occur. Now, the same group back in 2020 were teaching people how to avoid facial recognition, teaching people how to avoid being apprehended and things along those lines as well, and how to skirt the law in order to act in the way that they felt was appropriate without finding themselves in trouble afterward. So there is a little bit more to that than just, in my opinion, voicing an opinion. Now we're talking about this organized approach that creates more dangerous environments, at least in my opinion. Now look, both sides of the argument have these style of groups, and both sides of the argument approach things in a certain familiar way that can cause additional escalation. Okay. But what I want to comment on that mostly is the fact that this is the stuff that's going to make it keep getting worse. This is the stuff that's going to make it continue, because groups like that, they can't be funded and they can't exist unless there's something to go out and create a protest around. And when you go out and create it with the intention of assertive intervention, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where things get worse. And I think that that's what we're seeing. And, like I said, and I know you guys don't watch every video I put out, so I don't try to just say things as if you should know this already. I made a video, right? But what I'm trying to say is, because of the outcome of that trial, right? Now you're going to have people who think that, well, I'm going to do this or that because, this is this now and this is that now. And I think we've seen a lot of different comments, especially on what just happened in that Christmas parade, where the correlation was tried to be made between those two events. And I think that's disgusting, to be honest with you. But I also think that that is actually how some of these people are starting to think. And that really concerns me for how things are going to look here in the future with more vitriolic types of unrest and protests, which become riots, which turn into looting and everything else related to that. And I'm just worried that there's going to be a lot of bad interactions here in the future. So I want to talk to everybody about these things because I think it's important. I think we need to touch base every week if possible to try to really stay on top of what's happening. And I do want to go ahead and mention and double check with everybody here that you're aware, if you're in North Dakota, if you're in the Minot area specifically, okay, which in North Dakota, there's like 3 major cities. And then if you don't live in one of them, you just go to all of them at some point, just how it works, right? Okay, we'll say 4 major cities, okay? But what I'll say is, if you're near Minot or you have the ability to go there, I will be there next Sunday, November 28th at the Minot Rifle and Pistol Club Gun Show. Be there from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. I believe it's at the North Dakota State Fair facility. And I'm going to be there with the guys from the Concealed Journey, which is an awesome training group that I've linked up with recently, who are just going to be there at a booth trying to, tell people about what they do. Training when it comes to firearms proficiency, training when it comes to medical help, training when it comes to all those things, especially like beginner stuff and safety and everything else related to that. But I'll be there hanging out with them because I decided to use it as an opportunity to give everybody a place to come say hello if they want to meet me in person and kind of chat and just talk about things and, have a cool place to meet at as well. Because, we could, meet at a Starbucks, and all get on our laptops and, do weird things in the corner and pretend we're important. Or we could meet at a gun show, which, there you go. You're already there. What else are we going to do? I mean, I have ideas, So that's just my my way of kind of reaching out to the public and being able to say hello in person to all of you. So feel free to come by, say hello if you're in the area. If you're not in the area and you make a really long trip to the area just to see me, then I am going to apologize ahead of time for disappointing you because I'm not that interesting. But what I will say is that it will just be cool to say hello to some people and make some of that, face-to-face interaction. So I wanted to go ahead and announce that again and just kind of make sure everybody remembers that that's a possibility for you if you want. And if you do need anything else, don't forget about magicpepper.com because that's where you can reach me via contact form. I don't get back to every single message because I get so many of them now that I just can't. Like, it's not even about picking and choosing. It's literally about some of them end up so far down in my inbox that I think I've already read them at some point. So I apologize if I haven't gotten back to you yet. I usually get caught up eventually and I get back to you at some point, but it's still a good way to reach me. And that's where the Discord link is too. So if you want to go to the Discord and you want to join us over there and say what's up, talk about cool stuff, which we're trying to start talking about more of, make sure you do that. And then keep in mind, I just want to have these conversations. I'm not trying to inflame the fear, right? I'm not trying to incite panic or anything like that. What I'm trying to do is make everyone more aware about what's happening in our surroundings and what direction we're going in. And with the things we talked about tonight, with the indicators of the supply chain break, and the fact that the unrest is also part of that equation at this point in time, we know these things are fragile. And we know that the more this goes on for, the longer it goes on for, the more difficult things are going to become. And I think if you are doing Christmas shopping or if you're going out to get food for Thanksgiving or whatever else it might be you're doing right now, you're probably seeing some of that already because it is out there and it's becoming a little bit more obvious than maybe it used to be. So I wanted to mention that. And I do want to get back in the chat just real quick here and say thank you. Let's see here. Rob Sinelli, thanks for being here. Tom Conlon, thank you for being here. Jim Lang, good to see you. Let's see here. I got Agate Beowulf. Great to see you as always. Joe G, thanks for being here. Rebecca Snavely, excellent seeing you here. If you had trouble getting into the Discord, just go through the website. And if that doesn't work, I'll post a new link here on the community tab just so everybody on YouTube can access it, okay? So I'll post that tonight just so everybody has it. And I'll also mention more information about that meet and greet situation there too. And then, I just want everybody here to know that we're all here together, okay? The more of us that are prepared, the better off we are. And the less marauders there are, and the less people we have to deal with after an emergency. That's really what it comes down to. The less people that are dangerous, the better things will be. So do what you can, but also do what you can to prepare more people. See what you can do about getting people involved, getting people more aware, and just remind them of some of the things we talked about tonight, because it is easier to open people's eyes nowadays than it used to be, because it's right in front of you. I mean, go to the grocery store. Tell me it's not more expensive. I'll wait. All right? So thank you all so much. I think we're going to end it. We're over an hour now, and I am ready to move on to the next topic, which will come out tomorrow. But I do really appreciate every single one of you being here on Mondays. You guys are amazing. The support is incredible. And wow, I am motivated to keep doing this thing because of how awesome you all are. I will say, if you guys are trying to make this thing happen with me, and I appreciate that you are. If we can get to 100K, I will be doing some awesome giveaways and a cool live stream to celebrate it. So I'm hoping we can get there maybe next month sometime. But I really appreciate all the stuff you guys do for me when it comes to likes and shares. The shares are huge, trying to get info out there to other people who might not be exposed. Check your subscription, because a lot of times you get unsubscribed now. I get lots of messages about that on a regular basis. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping to do a cool giveaway type thing. And just as like a quick preview, like I have something from EcoFlow already that's going to be given away, and that's a solar generator. So I mean, I think that's cool, and I think there's some other cool stuff coming in as well that we're going to be having a good time with in one of these live streams. And It's just to say thank you. So hopefully we'll have that before the end of the year, and maybe in time for Christmas. You never know. And if you got a re-gift, go for it. I don't care. But I do want to say thank you all so much. All the support is appreciated. And without anything else to say, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.